And Jeff Sherwood, we are live. The Outsiders is back. Jeff Sherwood, what do you think about when I knocked down your door and said, "Hey, do you want to do this show again, my friend?" And I said, "Do you want to do a video podcast this time, not the audio podcast that we've been doing for Patreon?" How are you, sir? It's good to
I'm
connect
good.
with you.
Yeah, I'm good. I didn't know about the whole video thing. I mean, I'm sure my goatee's all messed up because I wear a mask all day at work. So, it's not as long anymore. I kind of trim it. So
Like it's kind of like a triangle a little bit. You
it
got
is a little bit. That's because
yeah.
that mask like comes down and like puts it together. It's weird. But anyways, yeah, I mean, I was happy. I knew that, this probably will, might come up again, opportunity, and the opportunity came up, and you actually stepped up and said, let's do it. So I'm game. You know me. I'm always game.
I actually stepped up. It makes it sound like it's not something like I don't step up.
You actually did this time, though. I mean, this was more because you like put most of this together.
Yeah.
Before, other times
you'd
be like, TJ do this, TJ do that, or, and this time you just took the bull by the horns and made it happen.
Look, I wanted to get something done before UFC 251, which is obviously what we're going to be talking about. UFC Fight Island in Abu Dhabi kicking off here Saturday. It's a big stretch for the UFC over in Abu Dhabi. I think the UFC, among every other sports organization out there, perhaps outside of like the Bundesliga, the German Soccer League, or Serie A, some of the soccer leagues in Europe have done a pretty good job. But as far as like American sports properties, you kind of have to say that the UFC led the way here. And you have to say that they've done a pretty admirable job, all things considered. We'll get into the dynamics of COVID and what it's meant for cards. Obviously, we're going to be talking about Kamara Usman taking on Jorge Masvidal instead of Gilbert Burns, and we can thank COVID for that. But just the nimbleness, I think, look, I'm talking to the man who reported the Tachi Palace in the UFC. So we've come a long way from what was that supposed to be, April 18th?
Something like that.
Doesn't that feel like 6 years ago?
It does. It feels so long ago. I remember I reported that on my birthday, and I don't even remember my birthday anymore. So, it seems so long ago. But I mean, as far as doing a good job, like we don't really have much to compare it to, but nobody's died. So I guess you could say good job. That they've been able to catch it, which I guess is, most of the battle, catch it before it can spread. I mean, imagine if we could do that everywhere in the United States. If, I go through a process.
Jeff, we have to live with it.
Right. Well, I go through a process every day at work.
Yeah.
And I get my temperature taken every day, as well as every employee there. If your temperature is elevated, they send you home. Like you cannot take another step. You go directly to your car and you go home and you go to the doctor, and you basically have to have a note from your doctor that says you don't have coronavirus, and then you can return to work.
Right.
And if you do have it, if you do test positive, because we are now testing once a month, and if you do have it, obviously you take an immediate two weeks off, and you have to have a negative test before you're able to come back to work. So, I mean, there's different processes that everyone goes through, and this is a total learning curve for the UFC, and it seems like they're doing a good job. I'm just wondering, as we start to have more fights, like right now, this fight worked out, right? Gilbert Burns tested positive. Boom, here comes Jorge Masvidal. It's not always going to work like that. It's not always going to be that easy.
It's not going to work like that, Jeff. You're not going to get a fighter who comes in who's more popular than the guy who's like in the fight anyways. It doesn't always work out that way. I think this was some planning by the UFC. Masvidal, I think, was waiting for his opportunity. Remember, this is a guy who was going to negotiate a new deal and was sitting out and was trying to really sort of play up the 2019 that he had. He was 3-0, had a tremendous year. we're talking it's a year since he really sort of made that stamp, right? Made that mark where the public said, "Oh, Jorge Masvidal, this is a guy I gotta know," and then he really capitalized off of that. And here he stepped up in the moment. We will talk about that fight. We will talk about the 3 title fights on UFC 251, of course, UFC Fight Island. It's a situation where these fighters will be fighting early morning in Abu Dhabi. So for the folks here in the U.S., it'll be regular time on the pay-per-view. I think there's a lot to like on this card. As we go through this show, which is we'll call it the reuniting debut of
Reunited, Peaches and Cream.
Yeah.
Peaches and Herb.
Peaches and Herb.
Yeah, you probably have no idea who they are, but
I do. I'm old enough to know what you're talking about. I didn't go to concerts like you did. I'm sure you went to some Peaches and Herb concerts in your but this is cool because this platform, very easy to use. It's intuitive. The comments that you guys are leaving on YouTube and also on Periscope, we're getting. We'll put some of those comments up at the end of the show. Would love for you to participate. Please subscribe. I told Jeff because kind of like I haven't had a haircut and my hair's looking ridiculous. And he told me the plant behind looked like my hair. And I said, I look like, what's it? Silent Bob.
Yeah.
Is that it? From The Simpsons. How many subscribers do you think we should ask for in the first week in order for me to shave my head live on the show next time we do it? What's a good number?
I mean, for the first week, I mean, if we're talking first week and we're realistic about it.
Be realistic. But don't lowball me because I don't really want to do it. But like, give them something to shoot for.
I would say 75.
Oh my God, no! I was like 250. I was thinking 250.
250 is a little much, I think.
Why is 250 a little bit much?
Because the word's got to get out. The
word's gonna get out.
Yeah. Well, we'll see, and it might take a little while. It might take a few weeks, a few months. We don't know, but. Who knows? I still always find it hard to believe that people actually want to listen to me personally. And so things like that are weird to me, even to this day. I don't think 75 is crazy.
75 seems totally doable. I mean, I want to shoot, let's say 150. Can we do that? Can we double it?
And if we get half of that, you just shave one side of your head.
No. Stupid.
Yeah.
If we get 75, you shave your goatee. If we get 150, I shave my head.
No, I don't. I've had hair on my face since I was a kid. I couldn't do that.
This is like as light on the beard as I've been in a long time. So I'm with you. Well, people are not listening to hear us talk about the hair on the heads that we don't have and the facial hair that we wish we did have. This is a big fight week for the UFC. Fight Island, right? I mean, this idea of Fight Island, the notion of people were thinking it's in the tropics. I was hearing rumors of all sorts of people. Managers were like, I think it's going to be in Costa Rica. Like, people were like all over the place, really feeling like, where is this going to be? And then the UFC announces Abu Dhabi. Totally makes sense. It's a great destination for international fighters for the UFC. The UFC understands how to facilitate and how to do an event in Abu Dhabi. And I mean, it is an island. Let's give them credit. It's Yas Island. Man-made, it's there. You were disappointed they're not actually fighting in the cage on the beach, right? You saw that. This is like King of the Cage all over again, wet and wild, right?
Right, and I was wondering. I immediately thought, what's the weather like?
Hot.
So, yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's like fighting at old WEC at Tachi when it's 104 out and the mat's scorching hot. So, but man, those are some nice photos that people are putting out. It really makes it nice. And I personally thought it was going to be Costa Rica as well.
Why Costa Rica?
I just thought that made sense, because that's where Bodog was, right?
Yeah, good call.
Yeah. So I thought, it made sense. It was easy. It's happened before. I didn't really think about Abu Dhabi being a real island, but the story kind of totally went down, right? First, Dana made it sound like he was going to buy an island and friggin' build it and they will come, But, so we're here. It's a place to have fights, and let's do it.
Let's do it, because it is a good card that the UFC assembled. I think it feels top heavy, but it's still fairly deep. Anything jump out to you on the undercard before we jump into the main card? Is there a fight in particular that you're saying, I really have to make sure I'm watching as the ESPN broadcast is going?
Not really. I mean, and I'm one that usually finds something good on an undercard. Just about every undercard, I'll find something that I like. But this one, like you said, top heavy. I'm happy with the 3 fights. Like, literally, if it was a 3-fight card with those 3 championship fights, I really wouldn't complain. Make them all 5 rounds, and just have, I don't know, longer interviews or something, but not such a long show. Give me 3 fights. I watch fights for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and I'm good. I don't have to watch all that stuff before that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the undercard bouts should be interesting as usual. The one that stands out to me, and I think to a lot of people as well, is the Volkan Jiri Prochazka fight. Of course, the former Ryzen champion coming over, and Volkan Ozdemir is no easy first fight in the UFC, but I think that's deserved, right? I mean, if you're going to be a champion in a major organization to come over to the UFC, you should be tested that way. I like that fight a lot. And I think Volkan is going to present some problems for Jiri in this contest, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, when you're coming over and you're carrying a belt from somewhere else, there's no sense in a warm-up fight or something like that, right? And I'm sure if you're coming over as a champion, you're getting paid decent money, I would hope. So when you're paying a fighter decent money, you have to put in a credible fighter with him. Nothing like a championship bout or anything like that, but somebody that, definitely is a test, because that's what you want to see. You want to see him immediately step into the UFC, get thrown into the fire, and see how he does.
All right. Well, let's get to the main card then. I mean, there are the 3 title fights. Preceding them, we get a fight between Amanda Ribas and Paige Van Zandt. I think most people are locked in on Ribas as the winner here. This is the last fight on Paige Van Zandt's deal. She's been talking a lot about the money that she hasn't made in the UFC and how she could have made money in other places. Right. It feels like the kind of matchup that the UFC sort of lays down from time to time, where you get a known commodity in Van Zandt, a good fighter, not a great fighter, and they throw someone who looks like the real deal at her in Ribas. I'd be surprised if Van Zandt wins this fight. You agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I will say this. My mom is a fan of Paige Van Zandt. So if that, I don't know how far that crosses over, because my mom's a fan of Dancing with the Stars. So obviously she saw Paige Van Zandt, and she actually asked me not too long ago where she's been, when she fights next, if you could believe that. So Dancing with the Stars works for some.
Every time we do this show, you seem to talk about your mom and Dancing with the Stars. So I believe it.
She still says how good Chuck looked in his Levi's.
Really?
Kind of freaks me out a little bit, but yeah, it is what it is.
It is what it is, Jeff. So that's the pay-per-view starter, Amanda Ribas, who looks like, a real threat at 125 pounds, a very good prospect. Yeah. And then we're talking about, it was a great fight until the finish, and the finish was wild. Jessica Andrade against Rose Namajunas. Does Rose have it in her to find a way against the super physical Jessica Andrade?
I don't know. It's so weird to try and figure Rose out. I mean, she's got skills. We know that, right? But it seems like a lot of things to be a very successful athlete in sports, you have to be so mentally tough. And I don't really know how tough she is mentally, but it definitely seems like there's been moments where she kind of lacks that a little bit. And I don't know. I mean, I don't want to go out and say, yeah, Rose isn't mentally tough, but sometimes I do question that and wonder, because sometimes it seems like she doesn't even care, to fight,
Right.
to win or lose. I mean, it doesn't. Most of these fighters that are fighting, it's their life. It seems like she would be cool just hanging out and doing whatever. Sometimes I get that. And not that that's such a bad thing, but sometimes when you're fighting the best of the best, that there's one moment or a couple moments in that fight where your mind can go to that area and be like, do I really want to be in here? Do I really, what if I lose another fight? Oh, well, I think about things like that, but she has tremendous skill. She's proven that. So, I think it's going to be a very good fight, but yeah, I think Jessica is she's
Too
just too
physical.
strong.
Too
Yeah,
strong.
too physical, too strong, and I think it's going to show in the end again.
Yeah, that seems like the logical point that Rose has to figure out, right? I mean, she did look good in that fight prior to the slam, prior to getting locked up.
She did.
And she can put some punches on Jessica, and she can score. Just can she find a shot that's really going to hurt Jessica?
Mm-hmm.
That's because stuff and bunches. So, what do you think now about these title fights? These 3 title fights by the UFC. The first one, I think most people would have expected that Petr Yan is a guy who was going to get a title shot, right? And then they throw in Jose.
Dana said early on, as soon as Henry Cejudo retired, Dana said it's going to be Petr Yan and somebody for the title.
Well, somebody's Jose Aldo, right? So people, I think, were like, "Oh, Jose Aldo's lost 2 in a row, and how do you get a title shot when you lose 2 in a row?" He didn't. I don't think he lost his last fight, and a lot of people agree. Do you agree that he probably deserved the win last time out?
I thought Jose did enough to win. I was definitely on that side of the boat after the fight. I thought he was going to get the win, but I don't like when we become okay with that. I mean, he lost. If you go to the record, he lost. And I don't think it's okay to say, well, a lot of people thought he won to justify this fight. I don't think that really justifies it, because if you justify that point, then you could start to justify a lot of different things, as the UFC has done. And now as the belts are tainted a little bit, and a belt doesn't mean as much as a belt used to, because we start to make excuses or points about things like, well, Jose Aldo, I thought, won the last fight, so I'm okay with him fighting Petr Yan for the title. Really, I like it because I'm a Jose Aldo fan, and I think Petr Yan is the next level. And with all that being said, I'm still in the back of my mind, like, if Jose Aldo wins this fight, I'm not going to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he won.
You can't, because he's so skilled, and he showed what he showed against Marlon Moraes. And Max Holloway is kind of his kryptonite. And there was questions like, wow, how's this guy who struggled with weight cutting his entire career going to make it down to 35? He made it down to 35, and he looked good.
And it looked good.
Marlon. But, there's always that tipping point for a great fighter where all of a sudden they're just not the fighter that they used to be. And I don't think we can say that yet about Aldo, especially considering the performance he did against Marlon Moraes. And I don't even know if Petr Yan comes out and puts it on him, that we can say that about Jose Aldo, because Petr might be that good. But have you seen Aldo slip? How far is he from the guy that was the dominant long-term champion at 145 pounds?
I really don't see it, to be honest with you. I mean, like you said, you brought up Max Holloway. Max Holloway can be a lot of people's kryptonite. And it doesn't matter how good you are. And we all know, being covering the sport for a long time, there's certain matchup points and things like that, that you just kind of come to a conclusion like, well, Jose Aldo will probably never beat Max Holloway. And that doesn't mean that he's still not one of the greatest and still can't beat everyone else in the division. So, I it's not like I watched Jose Aldo fight and be like, man, he seems slower.
Right.
He's doing this a lot more and not doing this, or, I don't see myself saying that in his fights. I still see him being very competitive. Like the fight with Marlon, Marlon's a killer, and Jose Aldo, came in, cut weight, made it fine, which was the first test, right? We were all like, oh my gosh, how's he going to make weight? Came in, made weight, and then we're like, okay, well, let's see how he looks in the fight. Holy shit, he's winning this fight. And then we're like, damn, Jose Aldo actually has no problems doing this. So there's no way that I'm like, yeah, I think Jose Aldo lost a step or anything like that. By no means. But with that being said, Petr Yan's a different type of guy.
Right. So you read my mind here. It's like, even if Jose is Jose Aldo, right? And even if he's that dominant figure, supremely confident fighter, super technical and fast, and will bury your legs and destroy you, at a certain point, he kind of got more into points fighter, and he started going the distance a lot. And the reputation of, he can't finish or whatever. But say he's on point and he's sniper Jose Aldo. How much do you think Petr Yan handles that in a way that still makes him come out and say, wow, this guy has every chance to be a long-term, long-reigning UFC champion? I mean, does he have that makeup in your mind?
I think so. And I think that I think this fight's going to tell us a lot.
Right.
After this fight.
This is a step up. This is not Uriah Faber, right? This is a huge step up.
Right. Yeah. Uriah Faber coming out of retirement, didn't really, seem to care if he fought ever again or not. I mean, yeah, this is a different ball game right here. So I think after this fight, we're going to have a better feel for where Petr Yan is going to fit into things. And if he comes out and just out pressures Jose Aldo and mauls him, it's going to be like, holy crap. If he can do that to Jose Aldo, he can do that to
most of the guys in the division,
in that weight division.
There's funny stories about Petr Yan, because I guess he tools around the UFC Performance Institute a lot, and he's kind of got this reputation as a guy who will challenge everybody, be like, what, let's not like in the Mike Perry kind of way, like where he's just like a nut, but kind of nutty too, and that like, hey, I'm Petr Yan, I'm gonna kick your ass. That kind of thing. Doesn't matter how big or small you are. It seems like that's kind of the attitude when he's around.
Right.
Jose Aldo is not someone to be arrogant against. And I'm curious to see how Petr handles adversity, because you got to figure Jose, if he's on point, if he's prepared. And again, the caveat with all these fights that we've seen beginning in April and now, through the calendar and everything, it's like you never really know how prepared fighters are. Mm-hmm. But I think he'll come in extremely confident, and we'll see if there's a price to pay for his confidence. If he comes in too confident, he's technical and he obviously hits hard, but a little bit of adversity goes a long way. And I think Jose Aldo is the kind of fighter who will definitely present issues for Yan. I don't know that Yan's gonna be faster than Aldo, and I think that's the first sort of thing to look at in this contest, is the speed aspect, especially in terms of range. And I don't think Jose is just simply going to allow Petr Yan to dictate range. And if he doesn't, you're talking about a scenario where Jose may actually put together some good moments. And how does Petr Yan, as someone who's so used to just dominating, having his way in the octagon, how does he handle that? That's the one thing I'm really excited about when I think about this contest. Is there one aspect of the matchup in particular that you're going to be focused on?
Yeah, that was the same thing. I mean, when we see a young guy, one of the first questions is, okay, what happens when he gets rocked in the middle of a fight? And, if we happen to see that, and we'll see how he reacts and see if he snaps right out of it. And that's all part of the process of becoming one of the greats, is all these little steps that you watch them take and accomplish and figure out. So I'm hoping that it's more of a fight, and that there are some moments in the fight where Jose Aldo goes off and lights him up a couple times, just to see his reaction, just to see how he takes that all in and comes back firing. That's going to say a lot. Just like I said, I think at the end of this fight, we'll know a lot more of where Petr Yan's gonna sit in the division.
No question about it. And that's how I'm thinking about the 145-pound championship fight as well, too, right? Because Max Holloway had been so good for a long stretch, and he looked like a guy that could dominate and hold it over the rest of the division. I mean, the way that he beat Jose Aldo, super classy. And then he comes up and runs up against a guy like Alexander Volkanovski, who's all pressure, all power, mixes it up beautifully. And even though he's a shorter guy, he's got a good reach on him. And Max just couldn't figure it out in that fight. I don't think there's any debate. I thought Max Holloway lost that fight pretty clearly. Do you agree with that?
I agree with that. that.
So I'm not buying into this narrative that Holloway did enough to win the first fight, and that he just has to sort of do what he's always done, and the result will go his way this time. It's a hard sell on that. I don't know how he finds the answer to the questions that he needs to answer against Volkanovski. And the number one question is the pressure, I think, because how does Holloway address Volkanovski's pressure and not succumb to it, Jeff? That's the thing. He's got to figure out how to defend his legs first, right?
Yeah,
that all came from pressure and low kicks.
That's the big key, is the kicks. I mean, when you go back and watch it, you just see those kicks, and even though a lot during the fight, sometimes you don't really seem like the fighter doesn't always react like they're really hurting, but those fights come rounds 4 or 5, round 3, they start to take their toll. So Max definitely has to find a way to stop that. And, I mean, get a couple good leg checks in, and sometimes, fighters completely stop kicking. So can he do that? I don't know. It just seems a lot of times it seems guys like Max take leg kicks like no big deal, right? Like they just walk through them and they're not going to hurt them. Henry Cejudo is one of those guys. Like, he takes leg kicks and just keeps going forward. But I think in this fight, Max definitely has to find a way to limit those hard kicks.
The thing the way that I see him doing that is moving backwards. He can fight moving backwards. He's done that. He throws beautiful counters. His movement's precise, creates angles in really great ways. I think all of that has to come into play against someone who is forward pressure and then up and down with takedowns, and that's Volkanovski. So if Holloway is going to avoid the damage to his legs, yeah, maybe he's checking, but I don't think so, and especially if he's not sparred. And he said he hasn't sparred for this camp. So there's no way to prepare your body for that kind of defense unless you've been preparing for it in training. And if he really hasn't sparred, if he hasn't built up the sort of resilience in his legs, I think leg checking is a bad idea. So it's range, right? He's got to fight at a different range, and that's the key to me. I think moving backwards, fighting in a way that makes Volkanovski's forward momentum not as much as an offensive weapon as a deterrent, because you're fighting and reaching. If he makes Volkanovski reach, even though Volkanovski's got a longer reach than him, I think that Holloway has figured out the adjustment factor, and he's figured out how to actually make it work in the fight. And that's the number one question mark for me, is range and distance. And can Holloway be effective moving backwards? Because I think that will address a lot of the low kick issues he had in that first fight, address a lot of the range and pressure issues he had in that first fight. Otherwise, I don't see a good outcome for him in the rematch.
Yeah, the Max's only problem is that when his opponent starts throwing, he starts throwing.
Right.
I mean, he throws himself right into the fire, and he has no problems doing that. And I think he needs to stay away from that in this fight. I don't think Volkanovski is one of those guys that you just want to get there and trade kicks and trade punches. I agree with you. A good counter striking game plan where you're moving side to side, moving back, and then sink that left hook in or right hook in and catch him as he's coming forward. But it doesn't matter what you do. Volkanovski's going to move forward, and he's going to keep moving forward until he's face planted. If that happens.
Yeah, I like the comments that Eugene Berriman made. He's Volkanovski's trainer, essentially saying like this idea that Max won or had success or looked good in that fight. No, like that didn't happen. That's not the fight that I saw either. I did not see Max Holloway look good in that fight. I actually watched it in a bar in Honolulu. I was in Hawaii for a Bellator card and also for a little vacation. And, I was excited to watch this fight. I was like, oh, Max Holloway fight. And, we're going to go in Honolulu and see how the people react. They were there for him. The people loved him and they wanted him to do well. And you hear the comments like in the bathroom afterwards, like, oh, Max won that fight. Max won that fight. Max didn't win that fight,
Right.
So I think really the onus is on him. To me, Volkanovski can fight the exact same way and have the exact same success.
Yeah.
The adjustments have to come from Holloway's side. And
right.
If he didn't train in terms of like sparring, if he didn't really get a lot of time, the Zoom training, that's nice. Do you believe that? Do you actually believe he didn't get gym time?
I don't.
No,
I don't. I don't believe anything when these guys say, "Oh yeah, I didn't spar." I haven't sparred for this fight. I don't believe that, and I don't think that they're lying. They're like trying to throw that out there, to blatantly lie. I think they're just trying to play mind games with their opponent. And I don't know what Volkanovski would even think by Max saying, "Yeah, I haven't sparred." Volkanovski probably don't give a shit, what Max did to get ready for this fight, whether spar or whatever. He has no issues with it. So, but I think a lot of times guys just say that. I don't know why. Obviously I get the coronavirus and everything, but why wouldn't you spar?
Yeah, a lot of camps did, and we'll talk about that in a second about the effect of the pandemic on fight teams. Of course, the main event is now Jorge Masvidal. It was going to be Gilbert Burns. I think if you're a mixed martial artist in Florida, you kind of really have to take stock of what you're doing and what your precautions are and how you actually can facilitate a training camp. It seems crazy. But here we are now talking about Jorge Masvidal, right? And he's not going to have his main man, Mike Brown, because Mike Brown tested positive for COVID. A lot of other people who were scheduled to go to Abu Dhabi won't make it because they tested positive for COVID, including guys like Dean Thomas and others. So what's the effect, do you think, on not having your chief cornerman there for Jorge Masvidal in this moment? Because it's not like he's a stranger to Kamara Usman. He knows Kamara Usman. He knows Kamara Usman's style. In a lot of ways, Usman's kind of like Volkanovski. It's like what you see is what you get, and you know what he's going to produce every time. He'll be in shape, pressure. But, Masvidal's let's assume that he sort of like mapped this out, right? He wasn't training full bore. He wasn't training 100%, but he was training and prepared. And so he thinks, wow, I got my shot. And then all of a sudden your main man, Mike Brown's not going to be there. How do you think that he handles that? He's had quotes to ESPN. This is a paraphrase quote. It's not the whole thing. I needed this individual to be there because it's a huge part of my career. It took the air from all of us. Now, that's not going to get in the way of what Jorge Masvidal thinks as the fight approaches, right? This guy has fought in every kind of venue and every kind of location.
Right.
Big and small, doesn't matter. He's a fighter in his core. But when you're got to make adjustments and you're maybe not 100%, you're probably not 100% prepared, you kind of lean on your corner a little bit more. Not to have Mike Brown there How big an effect is that on Masvidal, do you think?
I'm not so sure it's a huge effect, even though Masvidal said, quoted that, something like that. I think that's a lot of respect to his corner, man. He's given him respect. Masvidal is definitely one fighter that I think it doesn't really matter. Like, he could go out there and not have a corner. Not that he does not listen to his corner, but I think Masvidal's mind, like, he's a fighter. Masvidal's a fighter. And I hate to say, like, every fighter in the UFC, there's a difference between, a lot of these guys do it for sport, belts, whatever. But Masvidal is a fighter. So it doesn't matter if he fought at the local 7-Eleven or if he fought in one of the biggest fights in UFC. Like, I don't think his mind is one of those guys where he'd be like, oh man, I don't have my corner. I don't think it really matters. I don't think it really matters to him. I think he'll be fine. But this is a tough fight for him. I think this is whether he has his cornerman or not. I think this is a real tough fight. And he had, obviously we know he was training. He knew at one point he's going to fight Usman. Like regardless, he knew this fight was coming. So I don't buy into him, not being totally prepared. All of a sudden be like, oh shit, I got 5 days. I better watch footage on Usman. He's watched it. He's seen it.
There's no scouting here. There's no footage here. But, in the corner, look, we've had this discussion recently because cornering is becoming, I think without the crowds, there's been a more laser focused on what's happening in the cage, and we can hear and pick up so much more. So, the conversation that happened around the Max Roscoff fight and all this sort of like push. What's the value of a corner? Not having a guy like Mike Brown there, I think, is a big deal. I don't know if you noticed, Jeff, I've thrown up some of the Twitter comments. We've actually gotten quite a few comments and want to thank everybody for that. We see them coming in. We'll throw them up when they're good. We got this one here. Masvidal has the most fight IQ in the sport. He's got a big fight IQ. There's no question about it. And I don't think there's anything that's going to stop him from feeling like he should win the championship, except for one thing, and that's Kamara Usman. Because Kamara Usman's a hell of a fighter, and I don't know that he's not excited to fight George Masvidal, because I talked to Usman in March. Actually, when I was out in Vegas, March 7th for UFC 248. I had a chance to chat with him, and I talked a lot about Masvidal and his desire to sort of own ATT. He's beaten 5 ATT fighters. I think Masvidal would be his 6th. He actually made a joke that he if he did it, even if he didn't do it, he deserved to have like a mural of his face in ATT. I don't think Dan Lambert's going to want to do that, but I mean, if he wins this fight, he owns the gym, right? It would have been Tyron Woodley, Colby Covington, who's no longer there, obviously, and George Masvidal. That's not something you can really sort of just dismiss offhand. Kamara Usman is a hell of a fighter, and I'm not at all surprised if he beats George Masvidal. I think he will beat George Masvidal. I think if they fought and they were 100%, he beats George Masvidal. Although obviously there's more danger there. I think he's too intelligent, too much pressure. He's a grinder. He like wears on you and tears you down from limb to limb. He's like really not going to be a guy who is going to go away. So it's got to be like a walk-off from Masvidal, right? Something shocking from Masvidal to make it happen. Mm-hmm. But if it doesn't, I mean, are we expecting 5 rounds of Kamara Usman really putting it to him, grinding away, chipping at him, getting a late finish? Is that how you're seeing it?
That's how I'm seeing it, because I mean, we all know no matter what, George is tough.
Right.
And he's going to show up to fight regardless of the situation. 5 days or how much training, whatever. He's going to show up and he's going to fight, and he's tough no matter what. So I just see it being, I don't know about like a grinding type, but George has a way of trying to make fights a little dirty sometimes. Not dirty as in illegal, doing anything illegal or anything, but just dirty fights. Like, you know, sometimes you'll see a fight and you'll be like, man, that's you know, coming from a veteran like Masvidal who's been in the cage for so long. I mean, he could turn a fight kind of ugly. But I just think Usman's just too athletic, too smooth. I don't know. I can't see, like you said, now if Masvidal does land a punch, a big punch, something like a knee, yeah, he could knock Usman out. But I think Usman his movement's too good for that. I don't think he's going to get caught into that moment of a brawling with Masvidal. It's
Right.
going to be more of a skilled fight, skilled output, combinations, stick and move, you know, mix in, you know, change levels, things like that. I think it's going to be a whole package.
Water, right? Drag him in deep water and suffocate him and drown him. And then once you got the guy gasping for air, right? I mean, once you get an opponent thinking about survival, that's when Usman puts it on him and really puts combinations together. The one factor for me of why I really don't think that George has a great shot in this fight, beyond obviously the short notice and everything else that goes along with that, is that George always kind of leans on to that wrestling aspect. He's an underrated wrestler. Mm-hmm. I don't see that flying against Usman. I don't think that stuff's going to work. Those single legs are not going to work against Usman. It could very well be the opposite, where Masvidal has to fight a lot off his back in this fight. And I see either they're clinching up and tying up, and Usman's making him work and sort of getting the blood in the arms, where Masvidal's less explosive, standing up or on the ground. I see it in tight, kind of a close fight. That's Masvidal's approach. Usman's approach, and I don't see him wavering from that. I don't see a reason why he would get away from that. He's not going to let mind games in any particular sense get to him, even though Masvidal's playing up the whole, oh, it's Usman who's changing. You can't. Who is he really? What is he doing really? And I find that kind of intriguing, because that's actually what Masvidal was. That's how Usman pegged Masvidal. He's like, this guy is not the guy he used to be. 5 years ago, he wasn't this guy in the flashy robes and all these sorts of things. You know, so you can't really get into mind games too much in a fight that's made on 7 days' notice. But the fact that Masvidal is sort of taking Usman's line, I thought, to me, that sort of registered. It's sort of like maybe it hit home a little bit for Masvidal. He's sort of hearing it and wants to put it back on him. And it's one thing for words to do that, but when you actually have to fight a guy, it doesn't quite add up. It doesn't. I don't see it going Masvidal's way. If it did, I mean, that'd be incredible, right? Up there with some of the greatest sort of short notice, maybe the greatest short notice victory, especially depending on how it comes. But that would be truly, truly impressive in a way that I think very few moments like this would measure up to. Don't you think?
Yeah, I agree. And if Masvidal is able to pull this off, man, his level of fandom would go through the roof. I mean, there's already a lot of guys that have watched his last few fights. I mean, we've seen the Askren knockout 10 million times. You know, he makes another step up right here, short notice, somehow, some way ends the fight in a you know, great fashion. Everyone's really going to take notice, and he's going to be bigger than he's ever been, and could possibly be one of the most popular fighters in the UFC right now.
Absolutely would be. And if that happens, they 100% have to make Masvidal against Conor McGregor. It would be absolutely promotional malpractice for them not to make that fight. Even if you can't put people in the stands, right? You can't. You have to capitalize when you got it. And if Usman loses to George Masvidal, and suddenly you have a champion that people are captivated by, because, like, fair play to Usman, he's just not that guy. He doesn't translate to numbers. People are not clicking on his stuff, but they are for George, and they absolutely do for Conor. And I don't know how you don't make that now, unless it's simply a factor of, you know, Conor doesn't want to give up the chance to fight in front of a crowd because he loses too much money here, loses too much money there. If they can't make the numbers work, you get it. But it would be a shame, because that's kind of the fight that has to be made. I would think if George Masvidal is able to pull it off. One thing I wanted to hit on before we get out of here, we've been doing this for 45 minutes. Again, thank you to everybody who's watched. Please subscribe. Please pass this around. The link will go up on the YouTube page as soon as we're done, and I imagine it'll live on Twitter, on Periscope for a little while. We hit on COVID at the top, and I kind of wanted to sort of just come back and reflect on that. It was a little weird at first for me to watch the fights, not because there was no crowd. We've seen no crowds, right? We've seen The Ultimate Fighter, and we've seen little limited people in an arena, but it was just like there's so much happening in the world. I didn't know how to feel about watching the fights. I think I've gotten over that. I'm pretty sure I have, but I'm curious about you. Did you think, Jeff, that the fights needed to happen, should have happened, and now that they have, how do you feel about it watching, considering everything that people are dealing with right now?
Well, I've always said, and it's just not single fighting, like sports in general heal people. I mean, if we go back to 9/11, that first game that they had, the Mets game, when Piazza hit that home run, like everyone was watching the great moments that they had during that. Everyone got to sit down and watch that and feel good during that time. And I think it was the same way with the UFC. I mean, I sent out a tweet after the first UFC of them coming back and was like, man, I appreciate what the UFC 8 did. I appreciate what Dana White did, because it allowed us to sit back and enjoy, almost seem like life was back to normal. If not only, for those 3 hours or 4 hours, whatever. And I think sports does that to people. Sports, it has a healing thing to it where you enjoy yourself and you get to, you're watching the fights. When you're watching Usman and Masvidal, or Volkanovski and Max Holloway, you're not going to be thinking about the coronavirus. You're not going to be thinking about going to the grocery store and possibly getting sick. You're going to be enjoying yourself, and it just completely blocks that out of your mind. And that's a healing process, and I think it makes us all feel better. I never had any ill feelings about the UFC coming back, like, oh, that's not right. It's not a good idea. Who am I to say that? Like, if these guys want to fight and the UFC has a plan that people approve, and let it happen, and it seems to be working, I'm all for it. And yeah. I'm all for baseball. I'm all for soccer coming back. If they can have a plan and they show that there's not these mass, just things going wrong. And the UFC's done that so far. They're actually the only sport right now that has actually been running to where you can't look at it and say, man, this is, this isn't good. I mean, we talk about soccer. One whole team is out because they had 10 people. That scares me for baseball. Right. Team sports. I mean, I'm a huge baseball fan. I want to see baseball back, but I don't want to see it come back if it's creating bad things. And right now, the UFC is not creating bad things as far as I can see and as far as I know. So I'm here with open arms.
We'll see. I think individual sports are much easier to pull off. The PGA Tour's done a nice job. I think, we've seen boxing. Top Rank is on ESPN. Another boxing, Eddie Hearn on DAZN is going to do it. Bellator now sounds like they're going to come back in July. Combate Americas is coming back. They're going to be promoting fights in Miami. So you're starting to see this churn up. Of course, the UFC led the way. But I think the barrier to making it work is much, much greater in team sports, considering the number of people you have to have together who are mingling, the staffs and everything. I mean, I think the MLS is down in Orlando. The tournament kicked off. It's actually the first games right now. There's over 1,000 people down there in that bubble. That's a hard thing to pull off. And, I think you do have to say that for the most part, the UFC's program has worked. Of course, they're still asking people to fly, and they're asking them to fly for the most part before they get tested. Of course, that's what happened with Dean Thomas. That's why Dean is not in Abu Dhabi. That's why Paul Felder's not going to Abu Dhabi, because he sat next to Dean Thomas. So, these guys are now have to quarantine. But what does it mean if we're talking about guys like Mike Thomas Brown, people in Florida who are associated with gyms? If it gets into the gyms and it stops fighters from being able to train, then we're talking about a situation that really could get in the way of these contests. It hasn't happened yet, but I think there's so many unknowns and so many hurdles still to go. And Dana White's admitted as much. He's like, look, tomorrow this all could be done, but we're going to find a way. We're going to make it happen as best as we can. And I think their intentions have only been good. The Tachi Palace stuff was way too soon. Way too soon. They were trying to do it in a way that in our little world, in our little fight world, hey, maybe it wasn't a big deal, but considering what was happening in the larger context of our society and the health and safety of what was going on and really the uncertainty, it just felt like something that couldn't happen, especially since you ruined it. And I think I think the fact that they have moved on and their protocols along the way have improved is a good sign, right?
Right.
I think from each stage they've gotten better. I would like to see some improvement still, because we're going to get to a point where they're flying these fighters into hubs. At the hubs, they get tested and then they go to Abu Dhabi. But if they're flying into the hub with COVID, you're asking them to get on a plane. You're endangering other people. You're risking corners and fighters and all these sorts of things. So very much a work in progress. I think it's going to continue to be a work in progress. But, Fight Island, baby. I mean, we're talking UFC 251 here, Yas Island. It's a great card. And, I'm excited to be chatting about this stuff with you. We keep getting comments here, Jeff. And we're up to 20 subscribers on YouTube, by the way.
Whoa.
Yeah.
We're almost at 75 already. Is that when you shave your head?
You're going to have to shave your goatee. No, I'm sticking by it. If it's 150, I will shave my head on this program.
Okay, 150.
We can do it. Have high hopes. You want to go through some of these comments? Now,
Sure.
We're not going to all these comments. Some of you guys are jackasses. But if you have
what? We're not going to get subscribers that way.
They're not paying for anything. This is free, so we can call them jackasses. I threw this up at the beginning. I don't know if you know. This was the first comment we got. Glad to see the Isiders are back. Hope this ends up podcast form at some point again. Stay safe, gents. What do you think? Are we going to do an audio or just sort of leave this up? I mean, this is on YouTube. It'll be populated on our YouTube page. Just listen to it if you want.
Right, you can listen to it. You don't have to watch it. I mean, if it was me and me and your ass were on video, I would just listen. I mean, I definitely don't need this video of me and you. But it's live. So that'll be a good thing, and you can listen to it later. If you miss the if you miss the live one. So
Jeff, tell me what does this mean?
What is what? Rick from Rick and Morty. I think Rick and Morty was a cartoon.
It is. I don't know. I'm looking up Rick right here because I'm not sure that I appreciate this.
No, I appreciate all those.
Yeah, no, I get it. I think I'm more Sideshow Bob than Rick and Morty, but I'm with you on that. I mean, I'll take it.
Sideshow Bob. When you said earlier, you referred to Silent Bob.
I was thinking of Silent Jay and Silent Bob. That's what I was thinking.
Right. I think we should have some type of contest where they could screenshot this and keep you there and then replace me with other people that look like you. I think that would be good. But, I mean, I don't know. You could treat this just like a podcast, right? I mean, you don't have to watch the video. You turn the YouTube on your phone when you get in your car and you just listen to it. And who knows what the end will be with this. I mean, this is our first one. Everyone might hate it and we might, everyone might unsubscribe because Josh just called you jackasses. And, we may never do another one, but I doubt it. And we'll see where we're going.
We're going to do these. I really enjoy the format of it. we may like hop on if we get subscribers and you people actually like care about like what we have to say, and I hope you do. There's no reason we couldn't do this stuff like live after some events or whatever breaking news. I mean, it's really kind of an easy way to hop on and interact with all of you, and appreciate the questions. Please subscribe to our page on YouTube. It's the MMA Outsiders Show. I think that's the name of it. Let me double check here. The Outsiders MMA Show. So sorry, my dyslexia. Yeah. So I think we got to call it. We almost did an hour. Time flies. Time flies.
It does fly.
Yeah.
It does fly, and when you have something good to talk about, it helps. So good card. Top half, like you said, top heavy, but. Man, those 3 fights are worth the price of admission. I'm in.
So we're doing this. We're doing this live every Tuesday. Is that right? 6:30 every Tuesday.
No, today is Wednesday.
No, look how stupid I am. I can't keep track of days in this.
Well, for some of us essential employees that hasn't missed a day, we still continue to know what date it is and what day it is, and
Fixed it.
There you go. It's live every Wednesday.
No, I'm no longer an essential employee. If I ever was, what are you gonna do? But this is fun. I'm glad to be chatting with you, and I appreciate people tuning in and listening. Again, please subscribe to the page, and we'll throw this up on social media, and we'll see. I don't like Facebook. Actually, Facebook can go fuck itself. But you like Facebook, and so maybe we'll throw this up there as well.
Yeah, I think we will eventually once we figure out a little bit more, and we'll figure out Facebook. But just to everyone that's listening, go out there and make 10 fake accounts and subscribe so we get to 150. So
no fake accounts. I will be checking if you're real or not. real journalism here.
By next Wednesday, Josh will be clean shaven. I talked all over you.
Sorry, go ahead.
I said, so let's get 150 subscribers. So by next Wednesday, we will see Josh, and
we'll get out of here from Frank Gonzalez. Still got it, boys. We're good to go, Jeff.
I don't know if I ever had it, but you're cool. I appreciate that.
You had it, my friend. All right, for Jeff Sherwood, I am Josh Gross. You've been listening to The Outsiders. We will catch you next week. Thank you very much. Peace.